Okay, so I'm still thinking more about this discussion that's been going on about freedom, free will, agency, choice, decision making, all this kind of stuff. And I think part of the issue that maybe is behind my concerns that is maybe not as evident as it needs to be is that I don't think that we can ever be completely and fully descriptive of ourselves. That is part of the problem of language and of thought, is that in some way we affect ourselves as we think and as we talk. That is, our theories of ourselves, our accounts of ourselves, our explanations of ourselves, they're creative, that is, they have some impact, or maybe they're irrelevant, but they're never just merely descriptive. There's something more significant going on. And I was thinking about it more, you know, in the ancient world, the Stoics, just we'll say Epictetus and Seneca, we'll use those as the exemplars. They would say that there is one and only one freedom, the freedom of the mind. And the notion would be that, no matter how much a person is physically constrained and their body is held down, and I mean, this is, coming out of out of slavery, where people were physically tortured and abused, shackled, and the notion would be that a person could be literally free in their mind to think what they want, to laugh at those who would, do hardship to them. I mean, Epictetus, when his master had quite a cruel master, his master was tugging on his leg, and Epictetus said, if you continue to do that, you're going to break it. And he meant, like, a piece of your property. You're going to break your own property if you keep on it. And the master broke his leg, and Epictetus went, "There, I told you. See, now look, you broke it." And these stories are like legendary of his capacity to, with utter indifference with regard to his own hardship, go, "See what you've done, see?" And this kind of freedom of mind, this freedom to detach oneself from hardships, abuses. I think we today want to criticize it with good reason. I think we want to say, look, this, we don't want to celebrate the kinds of freedom of mind that help people tolerate injustices, that take something like slavery and or abuses, and say to people, well, just be more stoical, buck up, buddy. We don't want to sort of advocate that, as much as it might be helpful for people to realize that capacity. See, there's a tension there. And then that whole thing, that whole stoic orientation can, I guess, be set in contrast to something like Naikan. Okay, so David K. Reynolds does all this work in Naikan. Naikan. It's a Japanese school of psychotherapy, of wellness. And part of Naikan therapy, it's reflection therapy, but it teaches people that your thoughts you cannot control, your feelings you cannot control. The only things you can control are your behaviors and the things that you do, your actual doings and your actions. And I mean, it's really a very interesting, different orientation. When a practitioner of Nikon says, look, someone cuts you off and then they're very rude to you, can you think about retaliating? Sure, you may have no control over that. Can you feel like retaliating? Sure, you may have no control over that. But your action, do you retaliate? No, you have control over that. To realize the difference between the kind of control you have over what you actually do as opposed to what you feel like doing or think about doing. And look how different those two are. Now, I think that the point that I'm trying to get at in giving these two different philosophies isn't to say, well, let's pick one or the other. I think it's more to go back to this issue and say we can't be merely descriptive. That is, these worldviews become part of the conditions by which people experience certain kinds of freedom in their lives. But that is, the way they attune to certain capacities that they have to exercise their agency, their choice. I guess what we're going to call their freedom. I mean, freedom, I guess, is the word. It's not some superlative supernatural freedom, but it is it's the kind of freedom that comes from all of those bodily capacities that we have and the way that they've conspired together. You know, I think, part of the issue could be addressed in this issue of deterrence. Gary shot a video response where he was talking about deterrence, and he was saying, look, the reason that we apply punishments to criminals isn't to somehow stick it back to the criminal. I agree. I think the logic is that we, as a society, apply punishments to criminals not to help spread suffering around. It doesn't help even out the suffering. No, the idea here is that if some person sees someone get punished for some crime, some act that they shouldn't have done, and we feel like they had a choice in their ability to not do that, so then we try to say, if some person chooses this again, they will be punished. So we may say it's it's not effective a lot of ways. I mean, recidivism is the term that gets used for people who commit crimes and then become habitual offenders. And so the point would be, but maybe it's a deterrent to some extent for other people. So some person commits a crime, they get punished, and even if it's not effective in punishing the person, that is, there's no justice brought about by bringing about more suffering and more harm, and it may not even effectively keep this person from committing the same act. Now, it might, but maybe it doesn't. But I think we want to believe that deterrence works to some degree. Now, does it work completely? No, I think we want to admit it doesn't. I think we want to say that, it has some effect. Now, to what effect does it have? I think people could haggle about, to what extent are punishments effective deterrents. I think it depends upon the crime, it depends upon the kind of punishment, all of the social conditions that go on. But at any rate, it seems like the deterrence issue as a phenomena is again echoing this notion that because babies are born every day and people are being socialized and young people are leaving that kind of operating functional sort of, I guess, state of being into a self-reflexive state of being and are becoming more aware of their conscious capacities, because all of that's happening, I think we want to see that our descriptions, as we're talking about things, those become part of the ways that people literally do become more liberated in their agency or more, I guess, depreciated in that capacity, right? It's as if we can help talk people into a fatalism and a helpless determinism in the same way that you can help talk people into recognition of those places and moments where they do have something like an exercise of agency and choice. One could even probably argue, and I think with good justification, that there is a will, and the very first act of the will is the recognition that one has one. Thank you.